The Capcom localization team has decided to give us a little lecture in how a Japanese video game could be made woke even if the Japanese company making it has no clue what that word means. In a tweet talking about localization bringing Japanese games to foreign markets, where they put extra weight on things like cultural adaptation, preserving context, and inclusive storytelling. Ah yes, inclusivity, the verbal equivalent of a 1940s Roman salute, with all the subtlety and many of the intentions behind the one as well. As, of course, the moment we hear these words, we know what's going to be lurking further down the depths, don't we? Cultural sensitivity in characters, and, of course, inclusive language and representation. Natürlich. See, here's the thing. There is a lot of discussion going around right now about whether or not Japan will eventually go woke, as in many ways Japan is often lagging behind the West in terms of cultural relevancy, and the things that overwhelmed the West might very well do so in the East as well. And there are certainly many disturbing signs that this might actually be happening. Well, things like this, for example, or the fact that a fair bit of progressive legislation is being pushed in Japan at the moment, utilizing many of the same tactics as was utilized in the West, as this is exactly how Western corporations went woke as well. You get people in what appears to be relatively insignificant positions that begin to worm their way into the company, and then start hiring based on political affiliation rather than competency, because these people are activists first. Employees, gamers, and fans, distant seconds and thirds and fourths. This is kind of the problem with progressivism. It places politics before and above anything else. And so the HR lady will begin to hire along aforementioned practices. The marketing people will approach the people in power, the money bags, who don't actually really care about any of this, and say, hey, you know what the kids are really into these days? Diversity. Allow me to tell you all about it, and so on and so on. Or simply, as we are going to be seeing here, changing the product without the knowledge and or understanding of its creators. Not just translating reads the first part. Localization isn't just about translating words, it's about adapting the game for a global audience. Think cultural nuances, idioms, a regional flair. A good localizer makes players feel right at home wherever in the world they are. No, patently false, absolutely absurd, in fact. Because, see, here's the thing. When I am playing a Japanese video game, I am doing so quite explicitly to escape from Western sensibilities and the tattered, tortured remnants of what was once Western culture, now long abused and bent into an entirely unfamiliar shape. I don't want to feel right at home in a Japanese video game, because that kind of defeats the purpose of it. For all the talk of, things like cultural sensitivity and inclusivity and making sure that we are really adapting things to foreign audiences, you've never actually considered that what makes you unique might actually be what I would like to partake in. It is one of the wonderful points about progressivism, the idea of, again, weaponized hypocrisy, where everything must be adapted to Western sensibilities, and yet at the same time, we must also appreciate the culture of the people we are adapting it to. So, what you're saying is, you're changing somebody's culture to fit with somebody else's culture, simply because it's politically expedient to do so? That's weird, because you'd think the point would be to actually preserve everybody's culture, rather than bending and breaking somebody's culture to a political narrative, which, again, there is only one political movement that uses terminology like this. The importance of context. Lost in translation? Preserving the vibe is key. Jokes, references, and even gameplay elements might need a little cultural remix. It's important to find that sweet spot to make sure the players get the intended experience without feeling something getting lost in the process. Now, there is actually a point here. See, a lot of Japanese humor, for example, revolves around the idea of the Japanese language being, well, dumb. Just straight up dumb. And so things like word plays, because a lot of their words sound similar and can indeed even mean the same thing depending upon context, can become a good source of jokes, which simply doesn't exist in countries with, sensible languages. But if this was merely all they were doing, trying to explain that, this is a play on words that only really works in Japan, then fair enough. But the actual result is, stuff like this. It's just a great ball of fire. I see the Western context. Thank you. I'm sure that elevated the game experience. Your songs are hitting me right in the but it's hella powerful, should be useful against greed. And by the way, this is a list that Niche Gamer did about the awful politicization of English in localization in games and anime. Let me just point out how long this list is. And this isn't even from 2024, this is from the preceding year. The localization nonsense has been going on for ages, with an absolute deluge of examples of terrible and politicized localization, because again, this isn't happening in a vacuum. This isn't happening because the localizers generally do believe that they need to change things a little bit up for those silly Westerners. It's happening with a very clear and obvious political context. Again, the list kind of just keeps going. Bridging the linguistic gap. Each language has its unique structure and cultural context. Our teams work to ensure the narrative and dialogue maintain coherence and emotional impact. It's just not about words, it's about capturing the essence of the story in a way that resonates with the target audience. And again, if you were actually trying to do that, fair enough, but you're not, because of the next two. Character design and development must be culturally sensitive. See, this immediately contradicts the preceding two. If all you're actually trying to do is make sure that people from different regions understand the joke, fair enough, nothing wrong with that. But must be culturally sensitive? No. Something made over here does not need to take into consideration the cultural context of somebody over there. In fact, not doing so is exactly what makes it refreshing and different. What may be acceptable in one culture might be offensive in another. Tough shit. Localizers play a crucial role in ensuring that characters are relatable and respectful, avoiding stereotypes and other references that could be perceived as negative in specific cultures. I don't care. Nor should anyone care. The blanket response to this should be, don't play it and/or grow a thicker skin. Because the moment you begin to adapt the cultural sensibilities of everyone else to one thing, you will have nothing left but gruel, will you? If something becomes acceptable to everyone, it will not be unique or interesting because everyone can't agree on a single goddamn thing. For the love of God, if you want something to be culturally acceptable to every civilization on bloody Earth, you're really only going to be left with, a blank piece of paper? And even then, I'm presuming that if it's a white piece of paper, that too will be viewed as culturally insensitive in certain political regions. Inclusive language and representation. Localization efforts extend to promoting inclusivity through language and representation. This involves adapting not only the linguistic aspects, but also addressing gender-specific language, cultural norms, and diverse perspectives. The aim is to create an immersive experience where players from different backgrounds can identify with the characters and narrative. This can be very challenging for certain languages due to grammar. More importantly, it can be very challenging again due to the fact that you are not creating something for everyone. Japanese video games have a specific flavor to them, as indeed did Western video games used to have back in the good old days. People are seeking these products out not because they are culturally sensitive. If anything, it is because they are culturally insensitive. Japanese video games are viewed as a bastion and a bulwark against wokeism, which this explicitly is. This entire paragraph is nothing but modern-day Western progressive values being thrown down over the heads of a Japanese company. Adapting humor and wit. Humor often relies on cultural references and wordplay. Now this, as I mentioned, is actually true, making it a challenging aspect of game localization. Translators must carefully navigate puns, jokes, and cultural references to maintain the intended comedic effect. This requires a deep understanding of the target audience's sense of humor while staying true to your original wit. No. Ignore the target audience's sense of humor entirely. Explain the joke, sure, and sometimes it will not hit home. A Japanese pun will never hit home to somebody who does not understand Japanese. But you can simply go, oh, okay, right, note, this is wordplay, this word and this word sound similar, thus it's funny because of this. And I'll look at that and go, okay, that makes sense. You are never going to make it funny, and trying to translate it into an equivalent English pun is not going to work either, in large part because puns really aren't a tremendous part of humor in, well, most nations as far as I'm aware. Just ignore that, explain the joke if you must, and then move on. Attempting to make it funny in other people's languages, well, it's like trying to translate a saying from one language to another. Often, it simply doesn't work as well because there is indeed a great deal of cultural context within that setting, right? And if you cannot replicate that cultural context, which you can't because it is a different culture, then you are not actually going to be able to achieve the same effect. This is quite literally a hopeless aspiration right here, and so you should simply ignore it. Consistency in terminology. Maintaining consistency in terminology is crucial for a smooth and coherent gaming experience. This applies not only to translating words, but also to ensuring that game mechanics, instructions, and lore are consistently represented across languages. Establishing a cohesive language system helps prevent confusion and enhances the overall gaming experience for players worldwide. Again, you have a theoretical point here, but when you've already said that you are going to be changing word and languages to fit the cultural context of your audience, what you are doing is not maintaining consistency. What you are doing is rewriting the product and then also changing the background game mechanics, the lore and instructions to fit the cultural sensibilities that you have largely dreamt up and created out of whole cloth. The problem here is that even the parts that may have good points, like the lost in translation humor, like the puns and the cultural context, are all inevitably undermined and ruined by the focus on cultural sensitivity, by the focus on trying to make something that is unique, interesting, and dare I say it, diverse already, become uniform by fitting in to what is culturally acceptable within the target demographic. Not to mention, again, the very reason why I am seeking out Japanese entertainment is not because it is culturally sensitive in a Western fashion. It is the exact opposite, of course. And this too, as I mentioned, is very much so the way in which Japanese entertainment could be made to become woke. By simply saying that, hey, you know what, that game you made, well, it didn't sell very well at all. In fact, it was an enormous flop in the West. How could this be? Like, we've always made games these ways, and yet it was a failure. Oh, I don't know. Well, if you were to look at the localization team, you might see that the video game you made is no longer the video game you thought it was. But you're not going to be told about that now, are you? Instead, you are going to be told by the localization team and the marketing department that it wasn't very culturally sensitive, now was it? It didn't really have a good amount of diversity and inclusivity, and the West are really into that stuff now, so that's probably why it didn't sell as well. How about I bring you some people from the localization team, and they can tell you about all of the cultural context they are trying to add into your video game. Maybe you can make a better one next time around, huh? Maybe that one fails, and so on, until eventually you have an industry in as much of a shamble as the Western one. Now, hopefully, again, the Japanese industry, with the benefit of essentially hindsight, can look at these tactics and look at, well, stuff like this being produced by their own company and see how this is not going to make a whole lot of sense, and how this is obviously going to mean that they will be unable to maintain the specific flair of Japanese video games. God willing, they will then be able to take the correct actions to remove this cancer at its very beginning and root it up from the first day. But that's the question. Is Japan going to learn the lessons that we have learned in the West? Are they going to do something that is surprisingly rare in human terms and learn from the mistakes of others, or are they going to be forced to make the same mistakes for themselves? I really hope not, but considering the localization team has already been around for quite some time, I fear this is one case where humanity will yet again repeat the error of its predecessors. We'll have to wait and see, but the very fact that this is allowed to be put up on an official account seems to speak volumes about the amount of influence they've already been able to gain within the company, within Japan. Till next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.